The following video series was made a year and a half ago, but left unreleased. I felt that old sinking feeling from the outset and decided that rather than add my voice to what at the time was an already crowded field, that it would be best to wait to see how this murder played itself out. Neither my analyses nor conclusions have changed or been proven wrong, sadly. With the exception of the special comment at the very end, the video has been left as I made it.
911, do you need police, fire, medical?
Maybe both. I'm not sure. There's just someone screaming outside.
Okay. And is it a male or female?
It sounds like a male. Just send someone quick. Say stop.
So you think he's yelling help?
Yes.
What you just heard was the sound of a child being murdered, and that horrible silence that followed? That was the sound of nothing being done about it. Trayvon Martin was stalked and murdered by George Zimmerman, and the police have done nothing about it. Actually, that's not exactly true. What they've done is aggressively defend Trayvon's killer, defame and attack Trayvon's parents, intimidate any witnesses who've come forward, and declare that Trayvon Martin had it coming. What's followed is a war of willpower, with the sick and degenerate white supremacists on one side and the civilized world on the other. There's been a lot of people who have deliberately tried to confuse this case. Let me tell you what happened. George Zimmerman was an out-of-control racist with a long-standing history of violence. Looking to vent his bigotry on someone, he was a delusional paranoid who spent most of his time looking out of his window for targets. He got little attention, none of it good, and even less respect. His life was going nowhere. A classic case of a loser looking to be a somebody. When he spotted Trayvon Martin, he saw the perfect victim to make himself a hero on. He then got in his SUV and proceeded to stalk Trayvon around the neighborhood. After the police told him to not follow Trayvon, Zimmerman then got out of his SUV and continued to stalk Trayvon on foot. Next, he then accosted the boy. After that, he murdered him. The first cop on the scene did not attempt to question Zimmerman.
The police report says this. This is not just the chief. Now, this is one of the policemen. At no point did I question Zimmerman about the incident that had taken place. Now, this is the policeman on the scene. This is what he said in his police report. When you get an answer sheet that was given by the chief, Bill Lee, he says this: when the Sanford Police Department arrived at the scene of the incident, Mr. Zimmerman provided a statement claiming he acted in self-defense. So the officer on the scene said never talked to him, never questioned him, yet the police chief says he gave a statement. I mean, a complete, blatant contradiction.
As of today, nobody has come forward, and if the chief or anybody else in that department has possession of any statement that indicates there's a credible view of the evidence that he's justified, it would do us all a big favor if they came forward and told us what he said.
Eventually, a police detective, Chris Serino, did show up and began to investigate.
And how many officers came to your home?
2 detectives came.
And do you remember their names?
Detective Serino.
But he didn't believe Zimmerman's story for a second.
I was hopeful that there would be an arrest based on what the investigator told me at my house.
Is that Chris Serino?
Yes.
What did he say to you?
He told me that he and the other officer with him felt that it was not self-defense and that they needed to prove it wasn't self-defense. And he said that I needed to read between the lines because there was some stereotyping going on.
Detective Serino filed an affidavit that night to have Zimmerman charged with manslaughter. But the state's attorney's office, having absolutely no grounds to do so, blocked him for political reasons. That is exactly what happened, and it happened exactly like that. The Martin case has become a type of racial tug-of-war, with the white supremacists looking at it as a chance to spit on the corpse of a dead child and to insult black America by proxy. The media has thrown their support behind the Zimmerman camp, attacking Trayvon Martin in death and trying in vain to rehabilitate George Zimmerman's image. Let's compare these two individuals. Trayvon Martin was a law-abiding citizen. He played football, got good grades, and wanted to be a pilot. Zimmerman, on the other hand, has been constantly in trouble with the law for nearly a decade at least, and recently got expelled from school because the faculty felt he was a danger to the other classmates. He tried to be a cop, but was rejected, and was eventually reduced to being a security guard, but before long he'd screwed that up too. He's failed at everything he ever tried to do in life. Trayvon has no criminal record and never caused his neighbors or the police any problems. Zimmerman assaulted a police officer in 2005 and wound up having to plea. He's had 2 domestic violence charges slapped on him, one by an ex-fiancée who clearly feared for her safety. We can now see she was right to do so. His co-workers described him as aggressive and a Jekyll and Hyde. His neighbors described him as weird, and they themselves became the targets of his one-man war to get some attention. He even went so far as to go to his neighbors' homes to confront them about violating his standards of conduct. Now, let's get one thing clear. Zimmerman was not a neighborhood watch commander. People need to stop being stupid by calling him that. He wasn't anything but a neighborhood nuisance. He was not appointed by anyone. His neighbors didn't like him or trust him. So he appointed himself the neighborhood busybody of his gated community and then proceeded to call the police 48 times in less than a year.
The tapes from some of those calls were released to the public, and they showed that race was a dominant factor in who he pursued.
And is he white, black, or Hispanic?
Black.
What do they look like? Are they white, black, or Hispanic?
Black males, 2 black males in their late teens. There's 2 suspicious characters at the gate of my neighborhood. I've never seen them before. I have no idea what they're doing. They're just hanging out, loitering.
Mr. Zimmerman, can you describe the 2 individuals?
2 African-American males. This gentleman was walking in the neighborhood. I've seen him before on trash days, going around picking up trash. I don't know what his deal is.
Is he white, black, or Hispanic?
It's black.
Now, the police chief, a witless thug named Bill Lee, has said the reason he didn't have Zimmerman arrested was because there was nothing to contradict his self-defense claim. Well, at least one cop on the force didn't buy it, and neither did Zimmerman's neighbors.
Why? Originally, I didn't believe it was self-defense because what we saw when we walked out on the porch. If it was self-defense, why was he on Trayvon's back?
So you saw Mr. Zimmerman on top of Trayvon Martin.
Exactly.
When you say on top of, how so?
He was straddling him. Exactly.
His legs were straddling him.
One on each side, on his knees, with his hands on his back.
An army of witnesses have come forward, but the chief and his police department have attacked them. The police mischaracterized witness statements in their reports and tried to get witnesses to change their testimony.
We said, everything okay? And he just looked at us. And Selma asked him again, what's up? What's going on? Everything okay? And he just said, call the police. Kind of nonchalantly, like, leave me alone.
According to this partial police report, Kutcher is one of 6 eyewitnesses Sanford police took a statement from that night. Kutcher said it was short and police never questioned her in detail until after she repeatedly reached out to them.
Blew us off. And I called him back again and I said, I know this was not self-defense. There was no punching, no hitting going on at the time, no wrestling.
From the start, the Sanford PD were acting as a legal defense team for Zimmerman, bullying witnesses, tampering with testimony, and when that failed, lying about it. After Trayvon was murdered, the boy's body was held in the morgue for 3 days. Tracy Martin, Trayvon's father, finally had to file a missing persons report before he discovered that his son had been murdered. From there, Tracy Martin had to investigate the death of his son alone. Rather than help, the police declared a hasty end to the investigation, clearing the murderer of all wrongdoing. The Martins were eventually compelled to file a lawsuit to force the police to release the 911 tape of Zimmerman's phone call. Keep in mind, the police are putting up this resistance for a man they themselves cleared of wrongdoing, and on a case that they themselves declared closed. Clearly, they've been terrified from the start that their cover-up would be blown wide open. They were right to be so. The Sanford PD isn't a police department. They're a street gang. The Sanford PD's incompetent behavior is as much to blame as the racist Zimmerman. Had the Sanford PD not let Zimmerman off the hook in 2005, he would never have had a gun and Trayvon Martin would still be alive. And this isn't the first time the Sanford PD have been liable for the death of a black man. In 2005, a volunteer Sanford policeman and his friend killed a black motorist and then hid behind the old standby. He tried to hit them with his car. They were acquitted. In 2010, a Sanford police lieutenant's son attacked a homeless black man just for kicks, and the department did nothing about it until after the video surfaced on YouTube, 7 weeks after the assault. By the way, that police lieutenant was one of the officers investigating the murder of Trayvon Martin. No wonder the cops were so eager to intimidate witnesses and cover up this crime. They've had plenty of practice. But the worst behavior came from Police Chief Bill Lee himself, who's gone on several tirades brazenly defending and praising Zimmerman as the victim and blaming Trayvon Martin for being murdered. But Lee wasn't done whining yet. He then went on to wallow in self-pity, decrying how unjust it was that as a white man, people didn't just take his word for it. At no point does he hold Zimmerman responsible for any of this, and at no point does he express grief for the dead child or condolence for his grieving family. Bill Lee is the modern-day Bull Connor. He's the epitome of good old boy law enforcement in the Deep South. His intent is to take Florida back to the 1920s, and he intends to do it over Trayvon Martin's dead body. The police department, realizing that their little cover-up is blown up in their faces, has been tripping over their own lies ever since. They've passed this hot potato on to the state attorney's office, but that state attorney, Norm Wolfinger, was the same guy who refused to let Detective Serino charge Zimmerman in the first place. And you can imagine how enthused he was about being made to prosecute Zimmerman anyway.
Can you talk about the state attorney and what he said yesterday, Jasmine?
Yeah, I think the most astounding part of the meeting with the state attorney to me yesterday, when we initially sat down to talk to him and we asked him whether or not there was going to be an arrest made, he said that he was continuing the investigation of the Sanford Police Department to see if there was any evidence, enough evidence to prove a claim of self-defense. And when asked whether or not it was his job to prove self-defense or if that was the job of the defense attorney, he told us, well, no, that's not really my job. My job is to prosecute. And it wasn't until later in the conversation when I asked him if he planned on pressing any charges and if there were to be charges pressed, what those charges would be, he responded to me manslaughter. You know, the fact that he did not begin the conversation by saying, I'm continuing the investigation to see whether or not there's a claim for manslaughter. He began the conversation by saying, I'm trying to prove whether or not there's a claim for self-defense. His choice of words, I believe, are indicative of his mindset and indicative of what we've already seen from the Sanford Police Department, that they are investigating this case with the lens of trying to prove self-defense instead of investigating the case in a fair and impartial manner to see whether or not there is the possibility of a murder or a manslaughter charge. So that was alarming to me. The other thing, the other aspect of our conversation that was alarming to me was when asked about race, you know, the state attorney just brazenly shook his head and wouldn't even address the issue. He said, we're not talking about that.
Understand that. The problem here is far larger than just the Sanford PD. White privilege has been allowed to fester in that county until now there is no law and no enforcement, only good old boy cronyism. You are witnessing a conspiracy by both the police and prosecutors to let a child murderer go free. The FBI has gotten involved, but I have no faith in them. A few years back when W was wrecking the country, he pulled a PR stunt by having the FBI declare that it was reopening the Emmett Till case. Just out of curiosity, whatever became of that FBI investigation? When the Philadelphia PD murdered the members of MOVE, did that FBI investigation result in any arrests? During the 60s, it was the FBI who was running smear campaigns against the leaders of the civil rights movement. Meanwhile, they were giving money and legal support to the Ku Klux Klan, who, of course, the FBI never bothered to investigate. So don't go kidding yourself. The FBI has historically stood on the side of the criminals, especially when the victims were black. Florida's governor replaced the corrupt Norm Wolfinger and put a new special prosecutor in his place. By all indications, she will prosecute. She doesn't have much of a choice, but judging by how she's dragging her feet, I have little faith in her. I suspect that she will hold a sham grand jury hearing, but I wouldn't bet on her giving this one the old college try. I predict she will merely go through the motions of a trial. It doesn't take weeks to charge someone, so why are they telling us that it will take weeks for the grand jury to convene? Because, like Zimmerman, they hope that if they stall long enough, that the public pressure will blow over, or that perhaps Zimmerman's friends in the media can push some sort of counter-narrative, as they've been trying to do. Public interest may well begin to fade, and some other event or issue will finally get Trayvon Martin off the front page. That way, the investigation of George Zimmerman can at last be allowed to die a quiet death.